Would like to warmly welcome you all here to the Medina Theater Company. There's more seats here in front to fill in. Feel free to step forward if you like, and as people fill in here. I'm Andrew Meyer. I'm the mayor of the Village of Medina, and special thanks to the Medina Theater for allowing us to host this event here tonight. By now, we've all heard the term dissolution, and what we're here tonight to do is to hear how that process worked out in another community very similarly situated to Medina in terms of size and services. Tonight, at my invitation, we have the town supervisor for the town of Seneca Falls with us, and if I might just begin by offering a brief bio of Don. Don Earle was raised on a hobby gentleman's farm in Pennsylvania. He played on the local football and wrestling teams. Don has a master's degree in business management from Nazareth College and has been married for 13 years with 2 daughters, ages 31 and 13. He also has 2 grandchildren. Mr. Earle retired from 37 years service at New York State Electric and Gas. He also held various job experiences, including those in the electrical field and planning and engineering. He was a frontline supervisor and also a customer service manager for a division. Not only did he have a career in management, but he was also a member of the IBEW Electrical Workers Union. Mr. Earle was elected to public office in 2011 and has been managing and facilitating the largest village dissolution to date, being Seneca Falls. His hobbies include riding motorcycles, snow skiing, swimming, travel, being involved with sports, and being with his teenage daughter. Mr. Earle has been a part of the Seneca Falls community since 1987, and he's felt that this is as much a home as where he grew up. Recently, Mr. Earle was also elected chairman of the Seneca County Board of Supervisors. So if you please join me in welcoming Don Earle, Supervisor of the town of Seneca Falls.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. I've never been here before, and as I drove through the community on the way here, I said, well, this looks very familiar. Not much different than one that I live in. Thank you for the invitation, for coming here and sharing what we have done in Seneca Falls. Whenever you face a big change in a community, it's never easy. It's full of unknowns. But since we've done it, I hope to give you some of the ideas and facts that we've gone through. So let me go through a little bit of my presentation. Tell you a story. When I first took office in January of 2012, I'd never been in public office before. And people were saying, oh, you don't know what you're getting into. They're right. I didn't know what I was getting into. But I have to tell you that trying to serve the public is a very rewarding thing to do. It's not easy, it's very challenging. And as long as folks that want to serve the public do it with the idea of doing the best they can for the majority of people and not their own personal agenda, I wish a lot more folks would do that. In 2012, when I first went to the Association of Towns conference in New York City, there was a presentation on dissolution, and being brand new, it wasn't quite factual to what we were going through. So I said to one of my fellow councilmen, I said, we've got to do a presentation 1 year after, and that's what we did. I've updated this somewhat because we now are 3 years into it. So bear with me. I'll go through this and fill in some of the areas, and we'll hold questions till the end, and we'll give you time for any questions that you have. Maybe it's not going to work in the package. Do it the other way. So, we'll talk about background and history. Okay. efficient process, our community, and then questions. Much like this community, there's a lot of history. We have a population of about 6,800 plus or minus just in the village alone. Incorporated in 1831. And again, like a lot of communities, very rich in history. A lot of firsts, a lot of business, industry that from time to time will grow and then they fall apart and then they try to regrow again. A couple of things that we do have that are kind of unique to us is that we have, the Hall of Fame for women's rights. If you recall your history, Seneca Falls was a place where Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her cohorts actually were able to get America to decide that women definitely deserve to vote and have equal rights. Also, we have a bridge in Seneca Falls that resembles a bridge in Frank Capilla's It's a Wonderful Life, and we celebrate that every year. And we do have proof that he actually visited the area, so that's why we kind of tagged along and chosen that as one of our attributes. And many people ask, they ask in our community, I'm sure they're asking here in other communities as well, why dissolution? Is there any other way? And as time goes on, economies change, you ask, there's got to be a different way. And there are other ways too. One way that we tried was sharing of services. We did try that, and so many other ones have tried that. It really didn't work. And one of the big reasons that it didn't work for us is that when you have level of government in village and also the town, you have folks that don't want to give up power. And if they aren't willing to give up power for the better good, then shared services don't work as well as it's stated that they should. So we had to search for being efficient, the best ways of governing our community. Our tax burden was really increasing. Folks were starting to say, I don't know if I can live here anymore. I might have to sell. Our population was aging. We weren't attracting young folks anymore. The infrastructure, again, was aging. One advantage that this community in Seneca Falls has, and had then too, is that we are host to a landfill, a very large landfill. And we have a revenue from them. It's a percentage of their tipping fees. In the beginning, the tipping fees, the revenue from that came into the town, and the folks in the village did not realize any benefit from that. So as a result of that, the town folks were pretty much not paying any taxes. So that was a disparity that was kind of a rough thing, hard for the shared services to really work as well. We went through and did some studies way back in 2006 and 08. Joint municipal facilities discussions in 08 of June of 08, the village board resolution to initiate the study for dissolution. Now there's a difference now. When we did it, we could go through and actually get a true study and a plan for dissolution. After we dissolved, the law changed somewhat, so there's a different procedure now, which I'm sure that some of you are familiar with. In 09, they appointed a study committee. Representatives from the village and the town and the communities were formed to start asking questions. Well, gee, can this really work? What are the pitfalls? What are the unknowns? The plan was completed in November of '09. March 16th of 2010, it was voted to dissolve the village. Now, let me tell you, it was not by a huge margin, by any means. And there, for a short while, was a lot of controversy on it. Well, it wasn't much, maybe we should vote again. We did not vote again. We moved forward with a plan to have a true transition. And that is when the real work really started, because not knowing what to do or how to combine two entities, it was a challenge. Had to put together some committees. We needed professional and technical support. Our engineering company also helped us tremendously. We reached out to the state. State really was not that familiar, so we didn't get a lot of help as far as our plan or the transition plan from the state. Don't get me wrong, the state is very interested in entities combining. Where dissolution makes sense for your community, they support that and they are promoting that. Of course, attorneys had to be involved. Our fire department, we actually had two fire departments. We had a volunteer in the town, and we had a semi-volunteer in the village. Well, it didn't make sense to have two, so we combined those. And as we'll mention, I think a little bit later, the fire department, when you combine and dissolve a village, you cannot have a village fire department. I think that's according to law. So what we had to do is they had to create a fire district. And when you have a fire district, they had to create fire commissioners. Now, in the former village, we had two groups that had a union, a bargaining unit, and they had contracts. When you dissolve a village or an entity, all of those contracts are null and void. I'll talk about that just a little while. They actually came up with a principle. What is our theme? Why are we doing this? What is going to be our result that is going to benefit most people? And this is what they came up with, is consider what is best for the future community of Seneca Falls. The village actually had a dissolution plan. The town did not. The town said that rather than drawing one up for themselves, they would follow the best they could what the village had drawn up. And they did. And as you can see, they satisfied pretty much everything that was in that plan. As part of the transition, a lot of different things had to be considered. Had to talk about general government services, all of the executive legislative functions that were going to be transferred to the town. There wasn't any choice on that. That was a must. Police services. As I mentioned, the contract for the police department was null and void the day of dissolution. There was three different options that we looked at for the police department. One was to create a police district. That was very problematic because you had to have both the town and the village agree to do that, and you had to go through the legislature, and they would have to have approved it. The town and the village did not agree on that, so it didn't even get as far as the legislature. Another option was to abolish the police department and go with just the county sheriff's department and the state police. The third option was to form a town-wide police force. They chose to do a town-wide police force. And what that had done was it ensured that the new government, the town government, had control of the police department. By abolishing it and going with the county or the state police, we would not have had any say whatsoever as far as the size, the cost, anything like that. And it still would have been a pass-through through our budget. Public Works. They have water, sewer, highway, refuge collection. All these things had to be considered, and what are you going to do with those? How are you going to operate those? The village had a lot more assets and buildings and equipment, vehicles, than what the town had. So that was another thing. The town would acquire everything. Combining the village and the town presented a very good opportunity to eliminate duplication. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in one of the slides. When you dissolve a village, all of the employees of the village doing all of the functions of the police department, the water, the sewer, the highway, all of a sudden they're thinking, am I going to be out of a job? What's going to happen? We had those same fears. The town said, we still are going to have to operate the water, the sewer, and because they decided to have a townwide police force, they still had to operate those departments. So in essence, we brought most of the employees over from the village because they were familiar in operating water, sewer, and highway. On the police, not everyone came over. We had a number of retirements and people that just left to go in another department. Now, people ask, okay, well, how did you bring those folks over? Did you just bring them over in their existing wages, their existing seniority, their benefits? We did not bring them over in their existing salary because the salaries of the folks in the town was considerably lower. So everyone that came from the village took quite a sizable cut in their wages. They were given equality as far as their years of service. Their benefits actually were better when they came over, but their wages were cut. Kind of like the local laws and ordinances, they remain the same until they're changed. One example of that would be our zoning. Zoning would stay the same for up to 2 years. If we had not changed and adopted a new code, then it would remain the same as the village had. We went through and updated our entire code and adopted a new code, so it made sense with the new entity. As I mentioned before, the revenue that the town had from the landfill was non-tax generated. And that was used in different ways for the town. When we became one entity, when we were collecting tax on those town folks, that revenue could not be put into a reserve like it was before. It had to be used to balance the budget. It had to be used to benefit the entire town. As I mentioned before, New York State gave incentives, they still give incentives to consolidate. Now here's a big item, and I think probably all of you have explored this or are thinking about it, is debt. Our village had some debt. The town had some debt. Some folks think, well, if you combine, you just meld it all together and everybody pays for everything. Well, we did not do that. We did not feel that that was fair. There was more debt in the village, so we did not want to burden the town with all of that debt. Now, that debt included some bonding for infrastructure. It also includes the debt for retirements from the folks in the village. and some of the benefits that they get because they have been retired. Now, the town also had some debts, but not quite to the same amount. So what we did is we created what we call a debt district. We created one for the village, the folks that still live in the former village, and one also for the folks that live in the town outside of the former village. So our tax rate is a base tax rate for everybody in the town. It is slightly different because the debt district is added onto that base rate for village folks, former village folks, and also the appropriate amount for the town folks is added onto their base rate. Property owners is from the study that we had, or the plan, they were promised a 48% decrease in their taxes. Actually, they realized close to 60%. Another question is, people ask, what about our heritage? What about our name? People know this as our old historic village. What's going to happen to that? Is it all going to go away and nobody's going to remember the history? Those were the same fears that we had too, a lot of our residents. This is from Mark Twain saying that, no, we didn't go away. I always like to say that when folks come to Medina, they don't come to the village, they come to Medina. Same with Seneca Falls. Well, I'm going to Seneca Falls, not just to the village, I'm going to Seneca Falls. Some of the questions we had is, what's going to happen with the new community? You know, if we've not seen this plan, or you know, you've never tried it before. Who's going to run the water? Who's going to make sure that the toilets flush? And being that it was the 1st of January, what happens if we get a snowstorm? Who's going to plow the roads? Do the town folks know all of the roads in the village? How are they going to do that? What about our trash plan? We don't want our trash left out there. Who's going to do that? And again, as I mentioned, the police department, that was pretty much set up. The townwide police force is all in place, so that really was not a concern. January 1st, right after December 31st, and the ball drops, guess what? Nothing happened. Just like in year 2000, Y2K, if you remember that. Nothing happened. But honestly, there were things that happened. Not to the detriment, but underlying things that we had to deal with. We had to look behind the scenes. We had to really see the assets that we brought over, the services, some of the challenges, the unknowns as far as infrastructure, those type of issues. We had old and aging infrastructure in the former village. A lot of the equipment was far beyond their usable life. The water sewer rates had not been adjusted since 2003. I think sometimes governments fall into the trap that they think they look really good and they pump up their chest, and if they can keep that tax rate flat forever, man, they look really good. But it really is not good. And this is one example, not raising it since 2003. I'm not talking huge amounts, but in a water and sewer department, that is separate from your general budget. You have to have the revenues from your rates to fund those departments. And if you don't have enough reserves in there to replace aging lines and also to install new ones, you're in trouble. So as we took over, we were learning all of these things, and it was a blessing because the town, through the years, had accumulated some fund balances on their end because of good management and also the benefit of the landfill revenues. So we were able to meet those challenges, some of the infrastructure that were immediate. Not everything, we're still working on those. What we did first year is we implemented an asset management program, which was essential. We had to know what we had to know when it was purchased, what the price was, what was the likely life of that asset, whether it's a building, whether it's our sewer system, water system, a vehicle, you name it. We had to know because it is so essential to plan ahead, especially when you're budgeting. For those of you that are budgeting for a community, you know, it can be pretty tricky. The village had in-house trash pickup. They had their own truck, and as I state here, it routinely took 20% of available crews to do that each and every day of the week. And they were on different streets and they would do that. And that also was part of the problem because that trash truck was aging. And as you know, vehicles like that are not cheap. Some of the inefficiencies that the Homer Village were doing because they were instructed to, as far as plowing, street maintenance, curbing, sidewalks, again, because of budget cuts to keep the tax rate flat, suffered. We were fortunate because the folks that came over from the former village to especially our highway department, it was a challenge because you've got different personalities. You've got folks that are still fearful, not knowing what to expect when they're working for somebody new and a new entity. We're fortunate because we have a very capable highway superintendent. This is a working highway superintendent. He is as dirty as any of his workers. He does not ask any of his workers to do anything that he doesn't do. And it worked out really well. So the morale actually increased with those workers, and the interconnection with the existing ones, there was not a problem. I know we've all heard, well, we've never done it that way. Why do we have to do it that way? We've never done it that way. We've always done it in a different way. And this was very important that we took the position to not look at it that way, to look what is best for the community. Because when you've got to change, you have that opportunity to do that. And if you can take advantage of that, it will really benefit you. We decided to privatize our trash pickup with a multi-year contract, and that freed up our highway department workers to actually work more on the roads, plow, and repair roads in the summertime. We used our engineering firm to make recommendations on organizational structure. And after we combined some of the departments, because there were people that they didn't really know how they would work There were positions created that didn't make sense. It actually impeded the flow of those departments. So we had to make some adjustments. We had to eliminate a position or two and then take those duties and divide them up. That's always tough. It's never nice to have to do that. But again, we have to look out for the good of the entire entity, because everybody's a taxpayer, and you want to make sure that each taxpayer is getting the best value for the dollar. We had a lot of folks in our town outside of the former village that really wanted the police department abolished. Well, we didn't do that. And I have to tell you that it was a good decision, because now we don't hear those things. With the police force that we have going out to the former town, they have seen that their presence is much greater and the response time is much quicker. They take the time to stop and talk to kids, to the residents, and see what's going on if they have trouble with people speeding. So it really has turned those folks' spheres around. One thing I want to mention, I mentioned before, that when you dissolve a village, all of the union contracts are null and void. Well, the very first day I took office, the union rep, or former union rep of the police department, and their representative walked in my office and handed me a letter. I said, "Oh boy, what's this?" And they said, "This is just a letter that we would like you and the board to acknowledge that we have a right to form a union." Well, and we did. You really have no choice. It's either that or they go to a judge and the judge says, you have to give them the right to form a union. Well, they didn't, because they knew there was that controversy of people wanting to run a petition to abolish them. So they worked really, really hard. We worked hard with them. I formed a public safety committee, and we met with our new chief regularly and talked to him about what his needs were, his wants, some give and take, about overtime and costs, training. And up until just recently, they did not come to me and ask to negotiate a contract. So we went 2.5 full years without them even wanting to negotiate a contract. So that shows that if you have good cooperation and good committees and you listen and work with folks, you can accomplish a lot. Part of the cost problem in our former village was, as I mentioned before, keeping tax rates too flat for too long. And as you know, in a union, they have different contract negotiations. It is seldom that they go without a raise or improved benefits that cost the government some money. Over a number of years, that escalates to a very expensive ticket and bill. And it had also for the village of Seneca Falls. I think I've kind of talked about this one before. Our chief at the former village retired. He was ready to retire, and we hired a new chief. And that chief had been a policeman on the force for years. He had a lot of great ideas. He had the support and trust of the officers, and by doing that, he was able to create a good functioning department. And what they've accomplished in just the last year is they're one of the few police departments that have become accredited. And that's a huge honor for a police department to be able to do that. We'll go through some of the questions that were asked. everybody pay the same taxes. Well, they paid the same base rate, or they pay the same base rate. And as I mentioned, because of the debt districts, it's added on, and plus the refuge, there's a slight charge for the refuge that everybody pays. We had a district that was a little entity outside of the village, and part of the town. It was a Bridgeport area. And they had a debt because they had to bond some money years ago to get sewer. So that part will be paid by just that one district on top of their base rate. Here we go, like I mentioned before, the tax rate prior to dissolution was just under 17. It moved down to just under 6. Town residents went from 1.86 up to under 5. I have to tell you that our budget year in 2014 that we budgeted for 2015, we came to the point where we needed to raise taxes, and it had to be slightly above the 2% cap. So we made that resolution to allow us to do that, and we did. But I want to tell you that even by doing that, we are still in 2015 below the $6 per thousand. The bottom line talks about residents outside of the district. We have some folks that we provide water and sewer to outside of the district, and they have a 1.5 times cost, and that helps go into the fund balance for the water and sewer for operations, repairs, and upgrades. Back then, the question asked, well, gee, if you didn't have the landfill, would there still be a savings? And would it have been worth it? Well, back then, going from just under 17 down to 9 rather than just under 6, yes, there would have been a savings to still proceed. We didn't lose our identity. And I know all of you have heard of Old Forge, New York. Old Forge was a village back in the 30s and prior. They decided to dissolve back in the 30s. Did they lose their identity? Absolutely not. They are actually the town of Webb. But you go to Old Forge. You don't go to the town of Webb, you go to Old Forge. And they have flourished. They are booming. Anybody goes to Old Forge, you could never tell that they suffered a debt by dissolving their village. We received an incentive from the state, $535,000. Received an incentive again in 2013 and 2014. And the expectations are that it will continue. One less level of government does not mean less representation. Short-term benefits, of course, as we mentioned, were the reduction in taxes. But long-term benefits for the entity, the community, are going to be tremendous. You're operating as one, you aren't competing against each other. The town folks that could not vote on dissolution were very upset about it. and rightly so, they didn't have a say. And furthermore, their taxes went up. But you know something? They gained a huge advantage because now their taxes have been under control. They also have an equal voice in our government, whereas before they did not. This is something I think we've said before. The slide, I think I've gotten ahead of myself, but duplication of efforts is always a saving. Am I here to tell you that you should resolve? No, I am not. It is your decision. I'm only here to present to you the facts of what we went through and to help, hopefully, dispel some of the fears that if you don't know, you would have. I can remember when I went to the village of Lyons, and we had a gathering similar to this, and it was right prior to their vote. And after doing a presentation, it really wasn't like this, but we had a panel, and we did a shorter version and answered a lot of questions. And I remember one question specifically toward the end. What would you have done differently? Would you still have dissolved now that you've gone through it? And all of us at the panel said absolutely. And what we would have changed is that we would have done it sooner.